Imagine a religion famous all over the world for its incredibly progressive, like liberal social teachings.
Right, the stuff you always hear about.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking about a group that publicly champions world peace, the absolute harmony of science and religion, and, total equality among all people, regardless of race or gender.
It's a beautiful image.
Really is. But now, take that exact same religion and imagine it utilizing strict authoritarian control, systematic censorship, and the terrifying threat of social shunning just to silence its own members.
I mean, it sounds like a total paradox.
It completely does.
On one hand, you have this utopian public relations image, and on the other, an internal system that operates, well, almost like a surveillance state.
And that is exactly what we are exploring today for you, the listener.
Yeah.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are exclusively looking at a really fascinating piece of research by Karen Bacquet.
Yes, the article is called Enemies Within, Conflict and Control in the Baha'i Community.
Right, published in the Cultic Studies Journal. And what's wild is that Bacquet relies almost entirely on the religion's own primary sources, like their own letters and historical events.
She's not just pulling this out of thin air.
No, not at all. Our mission today is to unpack her specific points and understand exactly why her analysis of the Baha'i faith internal dynamics is so revealing.
Okay.
Because the gap between their public ideals and their internal reality is, honestly, it's massive.
It is. And Bacquet starts by tackling a very loaded word right out of the gate, which is cult.
Yeah, that's a heavy word.
It is, but she uses it with extreme precision. She explicitly argues that the Baha'i faith is not a destructive cult, in the vein of Heaven's Gate or the Branch Davidians.
Right, they aren't stockpiling weapons or heading towards some tragic mass event.
Exactly. Instead, she utilizes this concept of a continuum of religious control.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Okay.
Because on this continuum, you have completely open democratic organizations on one end and totalitarian high-control groups on the other. And Bacquet places the Baha'i faith firmly on the cult-like or high control end of that spectrum. Yeah. And she points to the governing structure as the smoking gun for this.
She does, because unlike a traditional cult, there is no single living charismatic leader.
Which usually throws people off, right?
Yeah, it masks the control. Instead, the religion is ruled by a 9-member elected body called the Universal House of Justice, or the UHJ. And the crucial detail here, the really important part, is that the UHJ is believed by devout adherents to be entirely infallible.
Infallible, like they cannot make a mistake.
Right. When they issue a ruling or a letter, it is essentially considered the literal word of God. It cannot be questioned.
Which brings us to the supposed democracy of it all. Because on the surface, the Baha'i faith claims to have this highly democratic system, right? They elect assemblies at the local, national, and international levels.
And they pride themselves on not having any clergy.
Yeah, but I was looking at Bacquet's breakdown of how these elections actually operate. And it feels like a political election where you, the voter, are forced to walk into the voting booth entirely blindfolded.
That is a highly accurate way to describe it, honestly. Baha'i law strictly forbids campaigning of any kind.
Wait, any kind?
Zero campaigning. You cannot state a platform, you cannot debate issues, and no one is allowed to form factions or alliances.
But how can that possibly be called democratic if the voters have absolutely no idea what any candidate stands for? I'm just guessing.
Well, the official reasoning is that forbidding campaigning prevents ego and, partisanship and political division. The ideal is that you vote for individuals based purely on their spiritual character.
Okay, but in practice?
In practice, Bacquet points out the sociological reality of this blonde voting system. When you have no public discussion of issues and no platforms, the electorate has nothing to base their vote on other than simple name recognition.
And name recognition heavily favors whoever is already in power.
Precisely. It creates a virtually unbeatable incumbent advantage.
Wow.
As Bacquet explains, this system inadvertently creates an untouchable leadership class because you combine an electoral system that practically guarantees incumbents will keep their seats.
With the theological belief that those same leaders are infallible.
Exactly. You get a ruling body that is utterly unaccountable to the people who supposedly elected them. They are accountable only to God.
So if the structure is built to shield them from accountability, how do they handle a member who, figures that out and starts asking difficult questions?
This is where Bacquet dives into the Baha'i faith's supreme emphasis on unity and this concept called the covenant.
Right, because their overarching mission is world unity.
Yeah, they believe their administrative order is the literal blueprint for a future global society. So because of that immense weight, Preventing internal schism or division is paramount. A fracture would contradict their core claim.
Yeah, that makes sense. So to enforce that unity, they rely on this spiritual contract, the covenant, established by the founders. And members have to turn exclusively to the leadership. Anyone who opposes them is labeled a covenant breaker.
Right.
But wait, I want to push back on this a little bit. Bacquet mentions that if you just casually lose your faith, like if you just decide to leave the religion entirely, they generally leave you alone.
They do, yeah.
But if you're a high-control group, wouldn't you want to punish the defectors? Why are they so indifferent to people leaving, but so aggressive toward internal dissent?
What's fascinating here is how Bacquet identifies the precise nature of the threat. To the administration, an outsider, or someone who simply walks away, is not a threat to the structure.
Because they're just gone.
Right. But an insider, someone who claims to believe in the religion but publicly disagrees with the leadership, that is an existential threat to that blueprint of unity. Bacquet notes that internal dissent isn't just framed as a difference of opinion.
How is it framed?
It is explicitly framed in Baha'i writings as a literal spiritual disease.
Whoa. So covenant breakers aren't just viewed as wrong. They are portrayed as spiritually sick.
Yes, spiritually sick, perverse, and highly contagious. The theological framing is that a covenant breaker is infected with a contagion that can spread to other believers.
And the treatment for this contagion?
Incredibly severe, complete and total shunning. If the UHJ officially labels someone a covenant breaker, all other Baha'is are strictly ordered to sever all contact with them immediately.
No speaking, no associating.
None.
No text messages, nothing.
Nothing. And this applies even to immediate family members.
Wait, really? Spouses? Children?
Including spouses and children, yes. Bacquet's analysis highlights the terror of this psychological bind. If you are a devout member and you have a genuine, principled disagreement with the direction of the faith, your choices are agonizing.
I can't even imagine.
You can either suppress your conscience, stay quiet and conform, or you can speak up and face total social exile from your entire religious community, your friends, and potentially your own family.
That threat of isolation is just a massive weight hanging over every single member's head. It ensures that the unity they project to the outside world is maintained, but not by genuine agreement.
Right. It's maintained by a very real, palpable fear of the consequences of speaking out.
And this structural dynamic heavily impacts the everyday believer, right? Especially those who convert later in life. Bacquet spends a lot of time discussing the massive disillusionment among converts, specifically from the 1970s.
Yes, what she refers to as the youth boom.
Because during the 1970s, post-Vietnam, you had this huge counterculture movement looking for spiritual answers. So the Baha'i faith saw a massive influx of young, progressive people.
They were drawn to those beautiful public ideals.
Right. They heard the pitches about racial equality, the harmony of science and religion, building a peaceful world. But Bacquet exposes a hidden reality that these newcomers only face after they are fully in the door.
The dissonance hits them fast. Once they are inside, they face intense pressure to proselytize.
What they call teaching, right?
Yes, teaching. There are these aggressive pushes to expand the membership. Plus, they are hit with jarring revelations regarding gender equality.
This part is crazy to me.
I know, despite the religion's explicit, heavily publicized teachings that men and women are equal, women are expressly barred by Baha'i law from serving on the supreme governing body, the Universal House of Justice.
It's like signing up for a grassroots environmental charity because you want to plant trees and save the world. You're excited, you're committed, but on day one, you realize you've actually been drafted into a high-pressure, rigidly managed corporate sales force.
That's a great analogy. And instead of planting trees, you are given strict recruitment quotas to meet. You are tasked with establishing and maintaining these fragile local administrative assemblies.
Which takes up, like, all your free time.
All of it. Bacquet notes that this administrative burden often comes at the complete expense of providing any actual pastoral care or community support for the members themselves.
And not only are you dealing with quotas and just administrative exhaustion, you suddenly start noticing that your fellow charity workers are secretly monitoring your conversations.
Right, to make sure you're loyal to middle management.
Exactly.
That surveillance aspect is key. Bacquet explains how the Baha'i rules against backbiting, which is essentially any form of gossiping or criticizing the institutions. They morph into a culture of peer surveillance.
Because protecting the faith from internal enemies is the priority.
Exactly. So members are encouraged to report each other to appointed officials known as auxiliary board members, or ABMs.
So if you just express frustration about the administration or question why women can't serve on the UHJ, your friends might report you to an ABM.
Yes, and suddenly you are facing a stern ideological interrogation.
Wow. And Bacquet actually uses demographic data to prove just how damaging this bait and switch is, doesn't she?
She does. The numbers are incredibly telling. While the Baha'i organization claims to have around 140,000 members in the United States, Bacquet points to independent polls showing only about 28,000 people actually identifying as Baha'is.
That is a vast discrepancy.
It highlights a massive turnover rate. People join for the progressive ideals, get completely burned out and disillusioned by the reality of the authoritarian demands, and they just quietly drift away.
You just walk out the back door. But, controlling behavior and enforcing this culture of peer surveillance is one thing. Controlling information is where Bacquet's argument becomes undeniably concrete.
Because you cannot maintain the illusion of infallible leadership if people are freely publishing well-researched critiques of it.
Right. Information control is essential to their structure. And this brings us to the Baha'i policy of pre-publication review.
Right. So according to this policy, any Baha'i who writes anything about the Baha'i faith, even if it is an academic paper intended for a secular, non-Baha'i publisher, must first submit their manuscript to the administration for vetting and approval.
They literally have to ask for permission to publish their own academic research.
Yeah.
Or even their personal thoughts.
Exactly. Now, the administration frames this not as censorship, but as a necessary step to preserve the, quote, dignity and accuracy of the faith.
Sure they do.
But Bacquet utterly dismantles that defense with a very specific, undeniable historical example from the 1980s, the story of the Los Angeles study class and a magazine called Dialogue.
Yeah, I was reading about this Dialogue magazine case, and it blew my mind.
Yeah.
Because these weren't radical, anti-Baha'i agitators trying to tear the religion down.
Not at all.
They were loyal, highly educated members doing a study class. They just wanted to have freewheeling intellectual discussions about their faith and how it applied to the modern world.
Exactly. They were devout members trying to engage intellectually with their own religion, so they created this quarterly magazine, Dialogue, and they followed all the rules.
They submitted everything through the review process, right?
They did. They used the official pre-publication review process. But the tension really boiled over when they prepared to publish an article titled A Modest Proposal.
And from what Bacquet outlines, the proposals were actually very modest.
Very.
They suggested things like imposing term limits on National Assembly members, which makes total sense if the blind voting system heavily favors incumbents. And they suggested eventually abolishing the pre-publication review system itself.
Right. In any normal democratic organization, these are standard, reasonable ideas for internal reform. You would expect a healthy organization to at least debate those ideas.
But they didn't.
No. The Baha'i administration's response was swift, severe, and punitive. They launched an immediate investigation. They pulled the editors into rooms and interrogated them one by one.
Just for suggesting term limits.
Yes. The magazine was effectively forced to shut down.
And they didn't just shut the magazine down, they punished the individuals behind it. 4 of the editors had their administrative rights revoked, meaning they were sanctioned, simply for suggesting structural reforms.
It was a very clear, chilling demonstration to the rest of the community. The administration proved they would not tolerate any independent platform for ideas that challenged their absolute authority.
Or even suggested that the infallible structure needed modernizing.
Exactly.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Because, suppressing a print magazine in the 1980s is relatively straightforward. You intimidate the editors, you revoke their rights, you tell the local community not to read the material. It's geographically contained.
Right, it's analog.
But then we move into the 1990s. The internet arrives. How on earth does an organization built entirely on the strict, top-down control of information handle the World Wide Web?
That is the crux of the modern dilemma for the Baha'i leadership, and Bacquet covers this transition brilliantly. The internet fundamentally broke their control mechanisms.
I bet.
In the mid-1990s, an academic email forum called Talisman was created on a university server. It allowed Baha'i academics, historians, and intellectuals, people like Professor Juan Call and David Langness, to have free, unvetted discussions online in real time.
Because for the first time, they had a platform where they didn't have to submit their thoughts for pre-publication review. They could just hit send, and instantly share ideas with hundreds of other members around the globe.
Exactly. And unsurprisingly, some of the opinions expressed on Talisman were critical of the administration's authoritarian tendencies.
And the administration panicked.
They completely panicked. The architecture of the internet meant they couldn't use pre-publication review to intercept an email before it was read. So they resorted to their heaviest artillery.
Which is?
High-ranking appointed officials, known as counselors, launched covert investigations into the most prominent posters on the Talisman forum.
Unbelievable.
According to the accounts of those targeted, they were directly threatened with the devastating label of covenant breaker if they didn't immediately cease their online activities and recant their views.
Which, as we discussed, means total social death. Losing your family, your friends, your entire community, just for discussing theology on a 1990s listserv.
Yes. And what makes Bacquet's analysis so robust in this section is that she does not just rely on the accounts of the dissidents who were threatened.
She uses their own words against them.
She proves her case using the administration's own words. She quotes a speech by Peter Kahn, a member of the infallible Universal House of Justice at the time. Kahn was scolding members in New Zealand who had dared to question why a fellow member was summarily dropped from the rolls for her online postings.
Yeah, Kahn explicitly stated that questioning the leadership's actions is a sign of a fundamental wrong and a profound lack of spiritual understanding.
Furthermore, Bacquet points to official letters written by the Universal House of Justice itself. These letters literally define independent thought and the internal criticism of the institutions as a spiritual problem.
It's crazy.
They openly stated that the internet was spreading a spiritual disease because it allowed members to bypass the established hierarchy.
It's truly astounding. The internet completely bypassed their ability to control the flow of information, and their immediate response was to fall back on their ultimate weapon of fear, the threat of shunning and spiritual condemnation.
It reveals exactly how fragile a high-control system's tolerance for open discourse really is when it can no longer control the medium of communication.
So, as you're listening to this, what does this all mean for making sense of this group? To summarize, Karen Bacquet's central, incredibly well-documented thesis in Enemies Within is that the Baha'i faith places its followers in a profound, psychologically damaging bind.
Right.
On the public stage, it champions these beautiful progressive ideals, equality, peace, the independent investigation of truth. But internally, it enforces strict authoritarian conformity.
And it achieves that conformity through mechanisms like blind elections that ensure an untouchable leadership class, plus pre-publication censorship that stifles intellectual growth.
And the peer surveillance.
Yes, a culture of peer surveillance masked as protecting the faith, and ultimately the terrifying threat of being declared a covenant breaker and completely shunned by everyone you love.
If we connect this to the bigger picture.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, Bacquet's article brilliantly highlights the inherent tragic tension between the Baha'i faith's stated desire for global harmony and its institutional demand for absolute, unquestioning obedience.
Yeah.
It is a classic sociological study in how a rigid organizational structure and claims of divine infallibility can completely override the progressive intentions of the membership. You simply cannot claim to be the model for a unified, democratic, harmonious world while simultaneously deploying surveillance and shunning to silence any internal voice that asks for reform.
You really can't. It's a fascinating, sobering look behind the curtain of a group that works very hard to project a flawless public image.
It really is.
And it leaves you with a final, provocative question to ponder. Bacquet's article clearly shows how the early internet in the 90s severely fractured the Baha'i administration's ability to control its internal narrative. Looking forward, as digital communication only becomes faster, more decentralized, and more pervasive, can any organization whose core identity relies on absolute